Perfect.
Great. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me this evening. My name is Madeline Dubeck, and I am the Executive Director of a nonpartisan nonprofit called Change Illinois. Change is actually an acronym for the Coalition for Honest and New Government Ethics. And so we have both a 501c3 and a 501c4 action fund that gives us a little more leeway to do as much lobbying and advocacy work as possible. And our mission is essentially to educate, engage, research, and activate people to get involved in improving ethics and efficiency in government and elections in Illinois. So tonight, I wanted to talk to you about gerrymandering and why we need to end it together. As some of you may know, this is actually a year when all governments in the nation are required to draw new political district boundaries. So it's a pretty significant and important undertaking. Let me figure out why I can't move my slides. There we go. So that's me. Just did the intro. I actually spent most of my adult life working as a journalist at the Daily Herald newspaper, primarily in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. Just by way of background, I am a lifelong Illinoisan and was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, and now live in Des Plaines out by O'Hare Airport. So what are we talking about tonight? We are talking about not just the need for redistricting this year, but the 2020 census, how Illinois goes about the prospect of remapping or redistricting, what might be some better ways in our view to do that, and how and why you should get involved in all of this and make your voice heard. So the census and political districts really together form the foundation for our democracy. And as you know, in the middle of the crazy year we had last year with the pandemic and a racial reckoning in this country, we were also trying to conduct a census. And there was a lot of controversy around it, and there continues to be, about the way it was conducted and whether we're going to really have an accurate count or not. In the census and getting a full and accurate count is absolutely essential because it really forms and informs tons and tons of policy decisions that are made in our country, in our state, in every local government. So for instance, the census is currently helping determine probably how many COVID vaccines we're getting. So it's essential. It drives billions of dollars of federal funding to the states and to Illinois in particular. So Illinois actually last year was one of the top handful of states in the nation that dedicated the highest amount of funding to trying to make sure that we got a full and accurate count of everyone in our state. You know, there definitely are pockets in the city of Chicago. The count was, the self-response rate for the count was not as great as we hoped it would be. There are also some pockets in deep southern Illinois where we didn't get quite the count that we had hoped for. And so this could present problems later on, and it could mean that we're not getting our fair share of federal aid in the years ahead, because obviously these census counts last for an entire decade, and they're used to draw our political maps at every level of government, and those maps last for an entire decade. So they are also critically important. Pretty much covered this already, but it really is the building block for all kinds of resources, from school funding to hospitals and healthcare to public safety resources, transportation, how much road funding we get. There's just an endless array of government decisions that are made that are informed by the census. So what is gerrymandering in a nutshell? Lots of you probably already know this, but I don't like to assume. Gerrymandering is when politicians draw districts to advantage one party over the other. And so our friends at Represent Us, which is a national nonpartisan nonprofit championing better government, put together a pretty cool video. So I'm gonna share this with you right now for a couple minutes if I can.
You think when you vote, you get to pick your leaders, right? Wrong. Before you get to the ballot box, politicians have already picked you. In fact, if you voted against the politician who won, they can literally cut you out of the next election so you can't vote against them next time. It's a nefarious process called gerrymandering. When Americans vote for Congress, we vote in geographical groups called districts. Those districts elect politicians to send to Congress. Districts are supposed to be drawn so they accurately reflect how people vote across a state. So if a party has 50% of the vote, they should get about 50% of the representation. But here's what really happens. Once politicians get into power, they can redraw district lines to effectively guarantee their reelection and skew statewide representation, regardless of how the people vote. Sound like cheating? It is. In fact, because of gerrymandering, 84% of all congressional districts across America are uncompetitive, and none of Ohio's are competitive. Before the election even starts, we already know who's going to win. Ohio is a swing state. That means about half the voters support each political party, but one political party holds 75% of congressional seats. How is that possible? Well, if you live in Cleveland, for example, you might think you'd be voting with everyone who lives in the surrounding Cuyahoga County. But politicians have drawn these crazy district lines that stretch all the way from Worcester to Canton to Akron, so they can control which voters get to vote in your district. Gerrymandering is about political power, and both parties do it when they're in charge of drawing districts. And it means political insiders have more power than voters when it comes to who gets elected. The US is the only democracy in the world that allows it. Okay, we're a republic, but you get what I'm saying. But here's the good news. Voters can enact new laws to stop partisan gerrymandering. We can make it so both sides have to agree on how districts are drawn, taking the process out of the back rooms and putting it in the open. Bye-bye self-serving politicians. Hello, voice of the voters. Share this video to spread the word.
So I'm sharing that video to spread the word. Are you getting angry yet? You should be. So how does it work in Illinois? In Illinois, actually, there's a very detailed and specific and date-driven process that is embedded in our state's constitution. And so, but in a nutshell, boiled down, it generally gives the power to our incumbent state senators and state representatives to draw new districts based on the new population data from the census that will last for the next 10 years. If they can get this done and get it approved, then it goes to the governor for either his signature or a veto. And if the governor signs the map plan into law, that map stands for the next 10 years. If the map is vetoed or if they don't approve one by the end of June, then the state constitution calls for a split partisan commission to be named. So legislative leaders in that case would name 4 people from each political party, major political party, Democrats and Republicans, to that commission, and then that commission is charged with trying to draw a map that a majority of them could agree upon. This has happened, I believe, 4 times in history. One of them was in 1970. And in 1990, I believe it happened in one case again. And so when this split commission is named, it was a process that was created to avoid this, but what has actually happened is that that commission has refused to agree and get the job done. And so in that case, our state constitution literally says that a ninth member of the commission is chosen from random selection. So what happens and has happened 3 or 4 times at least in the past is a Democrat's name goes into a replica Abe Lincoln hat or a crystal bowl, and a Republican's name goes into that bowl, and the Secretary of State pulls one of those names out of a hat, and that's how we determine which political party gets to draw maps that give them the most advantage for the next 10 years. Pretty crazy. Not the best process. So what's wrong with that process? As that Represent Us video illustrated very well, and as occurs in Illinois, where we have Democratic super majorities in both the Illinois House and the Illinois Senate, it's not, there are other states out there that are much worse and egregious when it comes to partisan gerrymandering. But what happens in Illinois is that the politicians are drawing maps to pick their voters instead of voters picking them. And so as a result, we have a lack of competition and a lack of choice. So half of the Illinois House districts and Senate districts in the last several election cycles, almost half of them literally did not have more than one person on the ballot in the general election. So there was no choice. And then when you factor in the additional races where there may actually be 2 candidates on the ballot, but that second candidate really isn't competitive and doesn't have the resources, is kind of a candidate in name only, then the percentage jumps up to almost 80% in recent election cycles. So, and of course, it's human nature. Politicians want to draw a map that is going to make their re-election campaign as easy as possible. It's really all about self-preservation for them, and they hold on to control of this process and this power with everything they've got. It's really amazing how important this is to them. And so the result is, when they're concerned primarily with making their reelection as easy as possible, they are engaging in voter suppression, plain and simple. And they are taking away our choices and our voices. And we really shouldn't stand for it. So in California, they had an independent Redistricting Commission enacted, and it went to work and drew maps after the 2010 census. And in fact, when that independent commission drew maps, one of the end results was that those citizen-produced maps ended up producing districts that saw 9 more people of color elected than had been when politicians drew the maps. So what else is wrong with this process, and why should you care about it? It's not open and transparent government, which is something that we all have an obligation to demand and that we deserve. So historically, what's happened in Illinois and in Chicago is that politicians will hold public hearings and they'll take testimony. But what they're really doing is going in a back room with closed doors and drawing the maps. And historically, what has happened is that they will unveil those maps at the very last minute. In Springfield, it tends to be on the last day or two before the session ends in May. They unveil these maps, and then within a few hours of those maps being made public, they're literally voting them up or down. Not at all transparent, does not center you and I in any way, shape, or form, doesn't give us a chance to comprehend what they're doing, digest it, and respond to it. So we've been working at Change Illinois to try to change that, improve it, and fix it. And so one of the things that we've worked on long before I was a part of this organization, back in 2016, there was a massive campaign and initiative to try to gather up as many voter signatures as possible to guarantee that there would be a question on the November ballot asking voters if they wanted to change the Illinois Constitution and this process that is laid out in it that gives the power to the politicians to a system that involved the creation of an independent commission drawing the maps. So that whole battle, there were almost 600,000 voter signatures collected, but it ended up being challenged, and it went to the Illinois State Supreme Court, and the court ruled in favor of knocking it off the ballot, not allowing it on. And so, unlike a lot of states on the West Coast, in Illinois, we have a very, very narrow window for trying to get things onto our ballot through citizen initiative. And this Supreme Court ruling from the Illinois Supreme Court made it very clear that there isn't really a pathway to do this sort of change to our Constitution. And so since that time, Change Illinois has been primarily pushing for and advocating for the creation of an independent commission by actually trying to get the state representatives and state senators to approve it themselves. And there have been times over the years when a few years back, the Illinois House actually approved an independent redistricting commission. But then the Senate never took up the same piece of legislation, so it died. We're going to continue to push for that and to advocate for it. But the situation now is that we are here in 2021. By law, we're required to redraw all of our maps this year, and the power is still in the hands of the politicians. The latest news from the Census Bureau is that the census count was so complicated and there were so many legal battles over it about whether there should be counting of only citizens or not, or if everyone should be counted, that there's been a really dramatic delay in the data. So at the end of last year, the Census Bureau is traditionally charged by law with telling the states how many seats they're going to have in the United States House of Representatives. They haven't done that yet. There's a delay there. Now they're saying that they will tell each state how many seats in the US House they get by the end of April. And then they're not going to actually produce the block level data that everyone needs to redraw all of our political districts all across the country until perhaps the end of September. So how this is going to affect the process in Illinois is going to be fascinating. It remains to be seen, right? Because literally in our state constitution, it says that lawmakers are supposed to have a map approved by the end of June, or else that 8-member split commission happens. And so, as you might imagine, with Democratic supermajorities in the Illinois House and Senate, that's opening up the possibility that that 9th member could be chosen, and it could be a Republican. And even though we have Democratic supermajorities, it could be the Republicans who win control of the map drawing process in Illinois. So I'm anticipating that somehow the Democratic leaders are going to figure out some way to work around that. And it may literally be just saying that the maps that we have now are fine, or it may be taking the most recent American Community Survey census data that they can find from 2019 and using it with some projections and passing a map without waiting for that new census data that is now supposed to arrive by the end of September. So we'll be watching that closely, and I would encourage all of you to pay attention to it as well, because these are our districts, not theirs. So what's the state of ending gerrymandering across the country? Here is a look at a map that describes which kind of color-coded map, looking at which states have independent commissions. The green states have independent commissions entirely. Yellow states have an advisory commission, which is kind of a different hybrid model of that. After the 2018 election, there actually were several more states that added commissions, independent redistricting commissions. Our neighbors in Michigan are among them. They started a really wonderful people's movement called Voters Not Politicians that began literally with a Facebook post from a young woman who lived there who was just fed up by the whole situation, and it ballooned into truly a revolution that forced an independent commission to be put in place in Michigan, and that commission is actually now currently doing its work. Utah and Colorado also have added independent commissions. I have a niece who was a part of that process in Colorado and who has applied to serve on that commission. They're going through that process now, and we'll figure it out pretty soon. Hopefully, we'll see whether she gets chosen or not. Missouri actually had some legislation that included ending gerrymandering and creating an independent commission, but then also included some restrictions on campaign finance and some other things. And that passed in the 2018 election, but in 2020, they actually took a step back and watered it down quite a bit. So it remains to be seen how that's all going to shake out. Virginia, this map is already out of date actually, and Virginia over here should probably be a different color. They also passed something last fall that is kind of a hybrid combination of independent citizens and politicians drawing maps there, which is also, there's a convoluted, complicated process that happens now in Ohio as well, where politicians still have a little bit of say in this, but not, total control. So that's kind of look at the situation nationwide. And what are some things that creating an independent commission or fairer maps will not do? They will not create a 50-50 split between Democrats and incumbents. That's really not what this is about. It's really about reflecting people's voting patterns and the way they live and congregate as they currently do. So going back to that example of the situation in California, when California created an independent commission, it was a Democratic state. And after independent commissioners drew maps, the numbers of Democrats elected increased, it did not decrease. Fair maps do not target incumbents. Ideally, you're taking that whole knowledge out of the process and just drawing districts, not perfect squares or perfect circles, but districts that make sense based on community and neighborhoods and communities of interest. And so ideally, as these independent commissions operate, they are taking that into account and listening to people, taking testimony from people, looking at community of interest maps that people can draw for themselves and submit and work on things that way. Fair maps also do not reduce the voices of people in minority communities. In fact, the Federal Voting Rights Act and the Illinois Voting Rights Act are at the top of our list of principles that should be emphasized and upheld in any sort of fair mapping process, because we do not want to reduce minority representation. We want to give those people who have historically been marginalized and underserved to have a stronger voice in our democracy. So again, the Fair Maps Amendment that we have been promoting and advocating for the past several years protects minority communities and minority languages, and requires that people on the commission be chosen who reflect the state's full racial and geographic diversity. We've also been working to count people where they actually live a majority of the time. And in fact, some of you may have heard yesterday or in the news this morning that the governor yesterday signed a massive criminal justice omnibus bill into law. And one component of that bill is legislation to end what is known as prison gerrymandering. That is when prisoners, people who are incarcerated, are counted at their prison addresses for 10 years instead of at their home addresses. So it's another form of suppression where people's voices and representation are being stolen from them and moved downstate, because as we know, most of the people in our prisons, for reasons of historical systemic racism, are people of color. And while the average prison term in Illinois is a little over 2 years, they're being counted as living in those downstate prisons for 10 years. So we actually just succeeded in getting this language into this legislation. The governor signed into law to stop that practice and to require that people be counted where they actually live. But unfortunately, the effective date of that legislation is not until 2025. That was a last minute change that occurred right before the bill passed, literally at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning on the last day of session before the new Illinois General Assembly took over. The Fair Maps, as I had mentioned a minute ago, also they prioritize the Federal Voting Rights Act and the Illinois Voting Rights Act, which attempt to ensure that minority rights and minority voices are protected and upheld and emphasized. Our particular Fair Maps Amendment, which we worked on for the past few years, also would have removed a requirement that we have now that essentially says 2 House districts equals 1 Senate district. But obviously we can't pass this Fair Maps Amendment this year because they're starting to get ready to draw the maps now. So we actually have some legislation we just got introduced in the House on Friday evening to try to emphasize these independent redistricting principles and demand that they be upheld and used in this process as the politicians draw the maps, and to codify that they have to have a certain number of hearings, that there ought to be hearings after a final map is proposed so that people can digest it, respond to it, react to it, and to require that that the lawmakers produce a compliance report that describes how they went about creating the maps and requires explanation for how they met these principles that are recognized as being best for independent and fair mapping. So we will continue to push that piece of legislation. And we've also been working since the beginning of the year with the Princeton Gerrymandering Project out of Princeton University. They have created a website called Representable, and Representable takes you through the process of learning more about independent mapping and redistricting and gerrymandering. And then it takes you through a process of getting you to think about what matters to you in your community and what are the important institutions and characteristics that make up your community. And then literally provide you with the software so that you can draw your own map of your community of interest, save it, and then use it later on as these hearings start to be held at the state level and at city levels to advocate for yourself and your community. So if anybody with us tonight is interested in learning more about that or getting a small group together to sign up for one of those representable sessions, please do reach out to me, and we'd be happy to host one of those sessions for you. A couple people on our staff will do that and take you through that whole process. Gerrymandering, this has been a frustrating, long battle because gerrymandering is clearly historically supported in the state of Illinois, but our politicians just will not see the light and approve it. So last year, in an attempt to be more persuasive on this topic, Change Illinois commissioned a scientific poll. And we very purposely picked a pollster who is used by a lot of the Democrats in the state of Illinois so that they would trust the outcome. And that scientific survey showed that 75% of Illinois voters want an end to gerrymandering and want fairer, more equitable, independent mapping in the state of Illinois. Democrats, by an even larger margin, supported ending gerrymandering. And within the city of Chicago, there is majority support for ending gerrymandering as well. So, we're never gonna end gerrymandering unless all of us decide to get active and engaged and speak up and demand it. And so I would encourage everyone watching this to please do that. This legislation that I mentioned that we've drafted and got introduced into the Illinois House is House Bill 3581. I will say that again, it's House Bill 3581. And if anyone is so moved, it would be wonderful for you to shoot a quick email to your state lawmakers and tell them to sign on as sponsors of that legislation and support it. We're going to push as hard as we can to try to get that through. And if we can get it done quickly before they start these hearings, then it would require them to have 30 plus hearings, and to make sure that there were some before and after maps are proposed, that they have to explain how they drew the maps that they drew and why and all of that. So who supports independent redistricting in the state of Illinois? This is a look at some members of the Illinois Redistricting Collaborative, which is a group that we lead at Change Illinois. It's quite an array of broad-based and deep member organizations throughout the state of Illinois, from the American Association of Retired People of Illinois to Asian Americans Advancing Justice, to Indivisible Chicago, to the League of Women Voters, NAACP, Rainbow Push Coalition, the John Howard Association, the Chicago Urban League. This list grows year after year. And so we're going to keep fighting until we win. So if you're moved to get involved, and I hope you will be, we have a tool on our website, which is changeil.org, which allows you to plug in your address, and it will provide you with a list of who your state rep and state senator are, who some of your statewide officials are, depending on what's available out there that we pull it, where we pull this data from. You may get some local officials as well. Find out who your US rep is, and we provide some contact information for you so that you can give them a phone call or shoot them an email or tweet at them. Any of those things would be wonderful and welcome. And so again, if you do want to get involved, I hope that you will check us out at changeil.org. Our Twitter handle is @changeil. I would ask you to ask your lawmakers to support House Bill 3581 to support fair and independent mapping. And hopefully you'll also talk to your friends and family and neighbors about this and ask them to join us, because it's truly going to take all of us rising up and demanding better from our public officials to make this happen. I just want to quickly mention before I wrap up that we're also working on trying to improve the process in the city of Chicago. Aldermen are required by December 1st of this year to draw new ward maps. They have also historically done it in a back room, cutting deals with one another. So we're going to try to upend that process this year and demand that things be done in a different way with more transparency, and keep things centered on the people of Chicago, and see if we can find some new and creative ways to create a ward map for the people of Chicago, by the people of Chicago, centered on the residents of Chicago and not the politicians. Now, of course, there isn't a big battle between Democrats and Republicans when it comes to the city of Chicago and its ward map. Again, it's an example of gerrymandering in order to preserve incumbents' reelection chances. So we'll have more to say on that very soon. So I hope you will go to changeil.org and sign up for our email so you can keep up on the latest news as it relates to redistricting, both in the city of Chicago and at the state level. I will stop now. I hope I'm okay on the time, and turn it back over to our hosts.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Madeline. I really appreciate that you ended the presentation on ways that everyone can get involved, which I think is super important. So once again, we do have about 10 minutes for a Q&A. So we have a few questions that we want to start with. I think we all have our cameras on right now. Madeline, we're actually not able to see you at the moment. I'm not sure if you.
Better?
Perfect. Okay.
Here I am.
Okay, so we have a few questions from the audience. I'll take the first one. So does Change Illinois propose or advocate for specific alternate maps or changes to the map? If so, what are some of the main differences between those maps versus the current map?
So Change Illinois essentially doesn't advocate for changing a map a certain way. What we advocate for is a change to the process that's used to draw those maps. So, everybody is required by law to redraw these maps every 10 years after the census, so that the maps are as close to equal in population as possible, and so that they reflect shifts in and changes in our population. And so one of the things that I should have mentioned earlier is that Illinois has been losing population compared to other states across the country that have been gaining population. And so as a result of that, the prediction is that we are going to lose at least one seat in the United States House of Representatives, possibly two. So we have 18 members of Congress in Illinois right now. We could be going down to 17 or even 16. So again, we don't, the maps need to be drawn so that they more accurately reflect the people who are here. We're really about, as I said, making sure that the federal and state voting rights acts are upheld, that we're maximizing competition and not focusing on where incumbents live and protecting them. Those sort of guiding principles are the things that we're most concerned about.
Thank you for providing that clarification.
So, next question. Is there a place where we can see examples of before and after map redraws in states that have adopted independent commissions and fair maps?
Yeah, there should be. If you, California, I think, is a great example that I obviously have relied upon a lot tonight and have appreciated quite a bit, because 2 years ago, in 2019, we had a couple of the independent commissioners from California, a Democrat and a Republican, come here in Illinois and spend some time with us and did some presentations. I'm sure if anybody just Googled California Independent Redistricting Commission, they could get a look at those maps and compare and contrast the before and the after. But as that nationwide map indicated, there also are these commissions in Arizona. Arizona was one of the first to adopt an independent commission. And there are also cities that have independent commissions, like Austin, Texas, and San Diego in California. So definitely encourage everybody to do some Googling and check those out.
So does Change Illinois support a move to reduce the number of wards in the city of Chicago?
This question comes up a lot. We have not taken a position and don't intend to. It's actually, the law as it stands literally requires that a map be adopted this year that contains 50 wards. So it would be a whole other campaign to try to change that. That may be something that needs to happen. We just haven't taken a position on that yet. That should be something, in my view, that the people of the city of Chicago should talk about and debate and determine for themselves.
For the green states noted who have independent commissions, what specific process or tactics did they use to change how their states draw maps? And then which ones would be beneficial to use in Illinois?
I'm sorry, what was the last part?
Oh, which, and for these states that have independent commissions, and let's see. Oh, yeah, the specific process for like getting an independent commission and drawing maps, and then if there's anyone that would be beneficial in Illinois.
Yeah, so in a lot of these states, what they do is, and what was in our Fair Maps Amendment was a requirement that the commission reflect the geographic and ethnic and racial diversity of the state of Illinois. Most of these commissions, go for something close to that, so that they're ensuring that different communities and different ethnicities and races are all represented on that commission as best as possible. Now, the problem is that, people have to apply to serve on a commission, and sometimes you don't get the diversity in the applicant pool that you would hope for. So for instance, our neighbors in Michigan ended up with an applicant pool that was unfortunately pretty dominated by white males. And so I think they, had to work extra hard to try to make sure there was some diversity and balance there. And they did, and they were able to get there. But it's definitely a challenge. And so, it's drawing these maps takes work, right? So you've got to hold a whole series of hearings. and try to really engage with different communities and different neighborhoods. And for a state as big as Illinois, it would also be a challenge. But the concept is that you want to require that the people who serve reflect the diversity of the state, that they not be tied to politicians in any way. So there are usually some requirements about not being a family member of an elected official or not being on the staff of an elected official. You know, a local, you could be related to a teacher, for example. So there's some clarifications about which public employees you could be related to or not related to and still be eligible to serve. But there are some parameters around that kind of help guide the process. The point being is that you're trying to really remove as much as possible elected officials from having an influence and a say over how these maps are drawn and whether they're going to choose their voters.
So what type of outreach is occurring to engage communities of color around issues of partisan gerrymandering?
So as I, at the one of those last slides listed all the different organizations that are in our Illinois Redistricting Collaborative. And they include a wide array of groups that represent different communities of color. I mentioned Rainbow Push. There are a couple of different chapters and the statewide chapter of NAACP who are part of our collaborative. Mujeres Latinas en Acción is a member of the collaborative. Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago. So all of those groups we are checking in with on a regular basis. And then we're also making a concerted effort to reach out to different neighborhood groups and communities of color to get them involved in these representable sessions that I talked about that we're doing with the Princeton Gerrymandering Project. So that, for instance, the Korean community on the north side of Chicago can take a stab at drawing a map of its community. And then Chinese people in Chinatown can take a try at drawing a map of their community. And then you can save those maps and use them to present to the actual map makers at public hearings that will probably start happening a little bit later this spring.
Great. One more question from audience member. Have there been specific coalitions or blocks in the legislature advocating for or against the House bill mentioned in the presentation?
So that House bill literally was just introduced on Friday evening, which was the deadline for introducing it. So there hasn't really been much time for opponents or proponents to build up. I will say that over the past several years, when we've introduced the legislation to create a constitutional amendment to have an independent redistricting commission, we have had the support of a supermajority in the Illinois Senate and not quite so much strength in the House. But in spite of having that supermajority of support in the Illinois Senate, we were able to get a subject matter hearing on this once, and it's never been called for a vote. So our challenge is truly to build up the people power and create a revolution to try to demand that this change be made.
So I think that was all the time we had for questions. Thank you, Madeline. This has been really interesting. One final note. So if there's one place people can go to get the information in terms of how to get involved, where do you suggest they go to kind of get all those different things that you suggest that we do, from following certain groups? What do you suggest we do?
You know, this is going to sound self-serving, but I would, of course, send you to changeil.org, our own website. And if anybody has further questions or want to follow up, my email is mdoubek@changeil.org. My Twitter handle is @mdoubek, DOUBEK. So I'm happy to follow up with anybody there. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to join in on the other Zoom a little bit later. But thanks for having me.
Yeah,
We
thank
appreciate
you. Really interesting. So people who want to stick around for the second half of the night, socializing, breakout grouping, 3-word intros, aka civic hacking, you can go to the Chai Hack Night remote Zoom, which is on the screen. Call will start at 8 p.m. I recommend you stay, but if you gotta go, that's fine too. I guess we have our last tradition. It's much harder with Zoom. So stay safe, take care, and
go forth.
forth and hack.
Perfect. All right. Thank